My name is Wyatt Hale, and this is the night my life split in two on Christmas Eve. My parents opened the huge iron and glass front doors of our Hillsborough estate and tossed my single suitcase onto the frozen stone steps like it was trash. My younger sister Leela stood just behind them, arms crossed, smiling wide like she had finally won something she had been chasing her whole life. "Let's see how you survive now, big brother," she said, laughing under her breath. I stood there stunned while cold fog rolled in thick and wet, wrapping the driveway in silence. I had no money, no car, no job, nothing left except the long wool coat on my back that used to belong to my grandfather and the suitcase that held whatever pieces of my life I could grab in 20 minutes. My father did not raise his voice, he never did, when he was being cruel. He just told me it was time I learned to stand on my own, that the family trust had been rewritten last month. Everything moved into Leela's name. Signed, sealed, finished. My mother could not look at me. She adjusted a gold ornament on the massive Christmas tree, like I was already gone behind them. Caterers froze mid-step. Champagne glasses hovered in the air, and my sister lifted her phone, recording everything. Her followers loved moments like this. She whispered, "Say something, Wyatt, give them a good ending scene." The door closed behind me with a soft click. The alarm chimed once, twice. And just like that, I was no longer a son. I was a problem removed. I dragged my suitcase down the long driveway, the wheels rattling too loud in the quiet neighborhood. Every house I passed glowed warm with laughter and music, trees lit perfectly behind tall gates. My fingers went numb fast, the cold cut straight through my jeans. I walked without direction, because stopping felt worse than moving. My mind replayed everything my father saying, "Capable men figure it out." My mother saying, "We cannot keep supporting failure." My sister laughing. As if this was entertainment, I kept telling myself someone would come running after me, that this was a test, but no one did. After a while, I found myself in a small public garden near an old church. A single street lamp buzzed above an iron bench dusted with snow. I dropped my suitcase and sat hard. My breath came out sharp and white. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. And that was when I finally broke. I cried quietly at first, then harder. Shoulders shaking, thinking about the kid I used to be, running through these same streets, believing family meant safety, believing love was unconditional. I had been wrong. I was thrown away, not because I failed, but because I was never the favorite. The cold crept deeper into my bones when I heard slow footsteps scraping against the pavement. I looked up and saw an elderly woman moving toward me. She was barefoot, her feet purple, with cold silver hair whipping wildly around her face. She looked like the night itself had carved her from fog and frost. She stopped a few feet away and asked politely if I knew whether any shelters were still open. Her voice was rough but gentle. I shook my head, embarrassed, and told her I had nowhere to go either. She studied me quietly, then sat beside me, leaving space between us. Her hands shook from the cold. Something inside me cracked open. Without thinking, I stood up, pulled off my only warm coat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She gasped softly, then held it tight like it was the first kindness she had felt in years. She took my freezing hands in hers, looked straight into my eyes, and said, "Kindness like that is rarer than diamonds." Then she smiled once, stood up, straighter than before, and walked away, disappearing into the fog, leaving me alone, colder than ever, but somehow lighter inside. I sat there shaking, wondering what I had just done, and why it felt like the most important choice of my life. And as the street lamp flickered above me, I had no idea that this single moment was about to change everything, and that what came next would make losing everything feel like the beginning, not the end. If you think this was the lowest point, wait until you see who comes looking for me exactly 1 hour later. I sat there on that iron bench long after the old woman vanished, my hands numb, my breath shaking so hard my jaw ached. The coat was gone, and the cold wrapped itself around me like it had teeth. I kept replaying her words, "Kindness like that is rarer than diamonds." I almost laughed at how unreal it sounded, coming from someone who looked like she barely survived the night herself. After what felt like forever, I dragged my suitcase back onto the street and walked until my legs burned. I found a cheap roadside motel just outside the gated neighborhood, paid cash for one night with what little I had left, and collapsed fully clothed onto the bed. The room smelled like old smoke and cleaning spray, but it was warm, and that was all that mattered. I stared at the cracked ceiling for hours. My phone buzzed with rejection emails from jobs I had applied to weeks ago, and one message from my sister already posted the video of me leaving the house. The caption said, "When your brother thinks he deserves everything." The comments hurt, but I turned the phone face down and tried to sleep. Morning came gray and quiet. I woke up stiff and sore, checked out early, and sat in my car, scrolling job listings, applying to anything that paid enough to eat. I drank bad vending machine coffee and told myself this was temporary, just a bad chapter, that I would survive like I always had. Then, exactly 1 hour after I had given away my coat, I heard engines outside, not one or two, but many. I pulled back the thin curtain and froze. 19 identical black luxury sedans lined the cracked motel parking lot, perfectly spaced like soldiers. The doors opened in unison, and men in dark coats stepped out, scanning the area. The middle car door opened slowly, and my heart slammed into my chest. The woman from the bench stepped out, same face, same sharp eyes, but everything else was different. She wore a long, elegant coat, her hair perfectly styled, diamonds flashed at her wrist. She looked powerful, ageless, unreal. She walked straight toward my door, like she knew exactly where I was. A woman in a suit knocked once and said, "Mr. Hale, please come with us." My legs felt weak, but something told me to stand up, to step outside. The old woman smiled softly at me, like we were old friends. "I have been watching you long enough to know who you really are." She said nothing else. The door closed behind me, the car pulled away, and the city disappeared behind tinted glass. 20 minutes later, we passed through gates I had never noticed before and stopped in front of a massive historic mansion, hidden behind trees and hedges. Inside, everything smelled like wood and roses. A fire burned low and warm. She motioned for me to sit and finally spoke. Her name was Elena Calloway. Her late husband had built a real estate empire, and after his death, she turned everything into a foundation worth billions. Every Christmas Eve, she left her estate, dressed as someone with nothing, and walked until she found someone who chose kindness when they believed no one was watching. Most years, she found no one. This year she found me. She told me her security team watched me quietly after I left the bench, saw me struggle, saw me never try to look her up or brag about what I had done. I sat there stunned, unable to speak. She leaned forward and told me she had no children, no heirs, and she did not want strangers deciding how her life's work would be used. She wanted someone who understood what it meant to be thrown away and still choose to care. She offered me a place to stay, a salary, and an apprenticeship to learn everything about the foundation. If after years I proved worthy, I would one day lead it, not as a gift, but as a responsibility. My voice barely worked. When I asked why me, she answered, "Because I know what it feels like to sit on a freezing bench with nothing and still do the right thing." She held out her hand and asked if I would come home with her. And in that moment, I realized the night I thought destroyed me was actually opening a door I never knew existed. But what my family does when they discover who I am becoming will test me more than losing everything ever did. I moved into the east wing of the estate the following Monday, and it felt like stepping into a different universe. Room alone was bigger than my parents' entire first floor, tall windows looking out over a rose garden and a lake that reflected the sky like glass. But none of it felt like mine, yet Elena made that clear on the first morning when she handed me a thick leather binder and said, "Welcome to work." Days started before sunrise with runs around the lake, led by a former military trainer who treated me like I had signed up for something brutal on purpose. After that, breakfast meetings, where I learned to read financial reports faster than most professionals. Then long hours sitting beside Elena in boardrooms full of powerful people who argued over numbers that could change thousands of lives. I was not there to smile or nod. I was there to learn. And she tested me constantly, asking, "Why would you fund this? And who does this leave behind?" Nights were worse. Spread sheets, policy manuals, grant archives. My eyes burned, my hands cramped, and more than once I fell asleep at the table and woke up with ink on my face. Elena watched everything quietly, never praising, never softening her standards. She told me kindness without discipline is just ego dressed up nice. She sent me to shelters, schools, clinics, housing projects all over the state. I listened to stories from people who had lost everything, mothers who fled abuse, teenagers who slept in cars, veterans who had been promised help and forgotten. Every story reminded me of that bench, and the cold, and the choice I made when I had nothing. I rewrote grant rules, simplified applications, demanded faster decisions and mandatory site visits. Eleanor bled red ink over my drafts and made me defend every change in front of the board. I cried in the shower, more than once, convinced I was an imposter waiting to be exposed, but I never quit because every time I wanted to, I remembered what it felt like to be thrown away and how close I had come to disappearing. June came fast one morning. Eleanor called me into the library sunlight. Cutting through stained glass, she slid a single folder across the table. Inside was an employment agreement naming me as future leader of the foundation's salary, authority, responsibility. The numbers made my head spin. But she stopped me before I could react and said, "I did not bring you here because you gave away a coat. I brought you here because I watched you choose people over comfort again and again." She told me the foundation would one day be mine to run, not as a reward, but as a duty. I signed with shaking hands that night. We shared a quiet drink on the terrace. She toasted to the boy who chose kindness when bitterness would have been easier. Months later, I was in my new office overlooking the city when my past walked through the door. My sister and her fiancé, dressed carefully, apologetic voices, practiced smiles. They told me our parents were in trouble, investments failed, money gone. They needed help, just a small amount, they said, like it was nothing. I listened calmly, then asked where the trust fund went. Silence, then excuses, risky bets, promises of huge returns. I slid a folder across the desk, showing the truth. Almost everything gone: luxury cars, influencer deals, vanity projects. I told them no, not today, not ever. They called me cruel, ungrateful. Security escorted them out, and within hours they posted a tearful video painting me as a villain. It went viral, but the internet dug deeper. Old clips, old stories, the truth surfaced faster than lies ever do. I said nothing and watched quietly as the narrative collapsed. That night, Eleanor poured me a drink and said, "Justice is loud, but closure is quiet." I slept better than I had in years. What happens when the people who broke you finally hit bottom and come back asking for mercy will force me to choose who I really am. Winter returned heavy and wet, and the news arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon. My father had lost everything. The last investments collapsed in a massive fraud investigation, accounts frozen, properties seized, and the Hillsborough mansion foreclosed without a single bidder. My parents and my sister moved into a cramped apartment above a nail salon, the kind of place they used to drive past without noticing for months. I heard nothing. Then one rainy morning, security called to say they were downstairs asking to see me. I told them to let everyone up. They looked smaller. Then I remembered my father, hunched hair, white, my mother, tired hands, twisting a tissue, my sister, no makeup, clutching a fake designer bag like it was armor. We sat in a glass conference room, no coffee, no water, silence heavy. My father spoke first, calling me son like it was a word he had forgotten how to use. He said they had nowhere to go, that the lease was ending, and they would be on the street. My mother cried quietly. My sister stared at the table, then finally looked up and begged. I listened without interrupting, then opened a slim folder and placed 3 cards on the table: a financial planner, a free debt recovery program, and a mental health support line. I told them this is what the foundation offers to anyone who loses everything through no fault of their own. My father's hand shook as he reached for the cards, then stopped. "That's it?" he asked. "After all these years?" I stood up and told him they had made choices, rewriting the trust, gambling on returns, staying silent while I was humiliated. Those were not my decisions. My mother said they were sorry. I told her I believed that, but apology does not rebuild a life work, does responsibility, does. My sister accused me of enjoying their pain. I opened the door and told her no, I just refused to pay for it anymore. Security escorted them out. My mother whispered sorry one last time in the hallway, and for the first time, the sound did not hurt. Weeks later, we opened the second home campus, 4 stories of light and red wood, families already moving in, cameras everywhere, officials' speeches. I stood backstage, heart pounding. Eleanor gave me a small nod. This project was everything: 200 permanent homes, clinics, child care job training. No one turned away for missing paperwork when my name was called. I stepped to the podium and told the crowd that 1 year earlier, I had been thrown out with one suitcase and no place to go. I said real family is not blood. Real family is the hand that reaches when you are invisible. I saw them near the back. My parents and my sister worn quiet watching. I did not look away. I finished by saying, "You are not disposable. You are home." Applause roared. I stepped down and walked toward the entrance. My father tried to call my name. I kept moving. My mother reached out, but did not touch me. My sister said nothing. For the first time ever, the doors opened. Warm light spilled out, and I crossed the threshold without looking back, not because of anger, but because forgiveness does not mean reopening the door that broke you inside. A small boy tugged my sleeve and asked if I built this place. I knelt and said I was one of many. He handed me a dandelion and thanked me for giving his family a home. I smiled and realized the night I lost everything was the night my real life began. But there is one final choice I must make when a stranger from that freezing night returns with a secret that changes everything. Life settled into a rhythm after the opening of second home. Mornings filled with meetings, afternoons spent walking the campus, listening to residents tell me what worked and what did not. Evenings quiet. For the first time in my life, I no longer woke up waiting for someone to take something away from me. I thought the story was finished. Then one night, security called to say a woman was at the gate asking for me. No appointment, no name, just said she knew me from a park bench. My chest tightened instantly, memories rushing back, the fog, the cold, the bare feet. I told them to let her in. When she stepped into my office, my breath caught. It was her, older, thinner than I remembered, but unmistakable. The same sharp eyes, the same calm presence. She smiled like she knew exactly how this would feel. "I never forgot your face," she said, "and I never forgot what you did that night." We sat across from each other, and she told me her name was Rose. She was not homeless, she said. Not exactly. She had been living quietly off the grid by choice after losing her family years earlier. She had watched the city change, watched kindness disappear. She had heard rumors about a place where people were treated like humans and followed them here. She told me she had been sick back, then walking barefoot, because she had given away her shoes to another woman earlier that night. When she saw me on the bench, she said she felt something pull her toward me like a test she did not know she was giving. I laughed softly at that. She reached into her bag and pulled out my old coat, the same one I had wrapped around her shoulders that night, cleaned, carefully mended at the seams. I kept it. She said I wanted to return it when the time was right. I took it with shaking hands. The fabric felt heavier than before. Full of memory, she looked around the office, then back at me, and said, "You turned one small choice into all of this." I shook my head and told her it was not just me, it was many people. She smiled and said, "Leadership always starts with one person choosing differently." She told me she had spent years working quietly with people who fell through cracks, helping them disappear when they needed safety. She wanted to partner with Second Home to create something new, a network for people who needed to start over without being found. Survivors, whistleblowers, kids aging out of foster care. She asked me not as a benefactor, but as someone who understood what it meant to vanish and rebuild. I felt the weight of it settle on me. This was bigger than any project. Before I said yes, without hesitation, over the next months, we built it together quietly. No press, no announcements, safe houses, legal help, identities when needed. Elena watched from the board and said nothing until one evening she invited me to dinner and said, "You have surpassed me." She smiled like a proud general and added, "Do not ever lose that instinct to choose people over comfort." Time passed fast. 1 year turned into 2. My parents moved again, smaller place, quieter life. We never spoke. My sister sent one message saying she was in therapy and trying to change. I wished her well and meant it. One fall afternoon, I returned to the same park where it all began, the bench still there, the street lamp still buzzing. I sat down, wearing the coat, and felt a strange peace. I realized I no longer needed revenge or validation. I had something better, purpose, proof that who you are in the worst moment matters more than what you lose. I stood up, ready to leave, when a young man approached me, shaking, cold eyes, hollow. He asked if I knew where he could go for the night. I looked at him, saw myself years earlier, and smiled gently, stood up, took off my coat again, and placed it around his shoulders, And in that moment, I understood the story was never about what I gained, but about what I chose to keep giving because the choice I make next will prove whether kindness is something you give once or something you become forever. I thought that night in the park was the end of the circle, but it was only the beginning of a larger one. The young man I gave my coat to was named Evan, 19 years old, recently aged out of foster care, leaping wherever he could without being noticed. I took him back to second home, signed him in like any other resident, no special treatment, just dignity over the next weeks. I watched him slowly unfold, the way people do, when they realize they are finally safe. He got a room, a job in the kitchen. Started classes at the job center. One evening, he knocked on my office door, holding the coat folded carefully. He said, "I think you might need this more than me." Now I smiled and told him to keep it because warmth is meant to be passed, not stored. He laughed unsure, then said no one had ever given him something without expecting anything back. Before that sentence stayed with me longer than any speech or headline. Months later, Evan stood on the small stage in the courtyard giving a talk to donors about what second home meant to him. He said it was the first place he had ever slept without keeping his shoes on in case he had to run. People cried. I did too, quietly in the back where no one could see. That night, Elena sat beside me by the fire and said, "You see now why I chose you, because you understand that systems change lives, but moments change souls." I asked her if she ever regretted walking out alone all those Christmas Eves. She shook her head and said, "Regret is for people who never test the world." I wanted to believe that goodness still existed, and I was willing to be cold to find it. One spring morning, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a short note from my mother. She said they were doing better, that my father worked at a hardware store now, that it humbled him that she volunteered at a food pantry and thought of me often. She said she did not ask for forgiveness, only wanted me to know she finally understood what it felt like to be afraid. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. Some things do not need answers. Time kept moving. Second home expanded to other cities, quietly, carefully, always focused on people, not press. Rose became a permanent advisor, appearing and disappearing like a ghost whenever she was needed. Elena eventually stepped back, fully leaving the board in my hands. On the anniversary of that first Christmas Eve, I returned once more to the bench alone, snow falling lightly, the street lamp still buzzing. I sat and thought about the boy I was, angry, scared, desperate for approval, and the man I had become, steady, grounded, certain that worth is not granted by family or money, but revealed in choices. I realized something important. That night, kindness did not save me opportunity, did not save me power, did not save me. I saved myself the moment I decided I would not let cruelty turn me into someone smaller. I stood up, ready to leave, when my phone buzzed. A message from Evan, a photo of him in his first apartment, keys in hand, smiling like the world had finally opened. I replied, "Proud of you, keep going," and slipped the phone back into my pocket. As I walked away, I knew my story was no longer about loss or revenge or even redemption. It was about continuation, about choosing every day to be the person who gives warmth, even when no one is watching, because somewhere in the fog, someone is always sitting on a bench, believing they are invisible, and all it takes is one person to prove them wrong. So, if you are ever standing at your lowest moment with nothing left, remember this: the smallest choice you make might be the one that builds your entire future.